Welcome to On the Moneyline, a podcast by MMA Play 365. I'm Newsome, and I'm here to break down UFC 321, which goes down next weekend. We're back in Abu Dhabi for this one, and you know these Abu Dhabi cards always deliver. Now, talking about delivering, I'm delivering this podcast a day early, just like the start time for the event on Saturday. It's going to be, at least for the UK and European fight fans, it's going to be an afternoon start card. Obviously, for you guys in the US, it'll be closer to morning, depending on what time zone you're there. So, an early start time for the event on Saturday and an early podcast for this event from myself as well. So, look, it's a phenomenal card. We've got 2 title fights on the card, a unification finally for the UFC Heavyweight Championship, and then we've got the vacant UFC Strawweight Championship as well, since Weili Zhang has vacated the belt to go up in weight to fight Valentina Shevchenko for Shevchenko's flyweight title, and that's going to be an insane fight as well. But yeah, look, we've got 2 title fights for this card in Abu Dhabi, plus an absolutely stacked card from bottom to top as well. So I'm looking forward to getting into the breakdowns. But as always, before I do get into those breakdowns, if you're wanting to jump into the action this weekend, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. We've got something for every type of gambler, long-term gamblers, fun gamblers, gamblers that just don't want to do any work whatsoever and just tailor professional handicapper, which is myself. Our service serves you as well. And then, of course, every betting subscription comes with Bayes AI, our UFC prediction software, which gives you a percentage prediction for every possible outcome of every UFC fight for every UFC event. No bias, just data. And again, it's all included in every betting subscription. All you've got to do is choose whether you want to purchase one event, pay monthly, or take advantage of our super value package, which is the annual subscription for just $99 for the entire year. 12 months of UFC betting advice. And the reason why our packages are super affordable is because our ethos is we want you to make your money back as quickly as you possibly can, so you can start profiting on top of your bets. And the way we do that is by making everything affordable. So if you're wanting to jump into the action for this event, which if you're tuning into this, I'm pretty sure you're going to want to, make sure you go to MMAplay365.com. And that's it. With the introduction out the way, with the promo out of the way, let's get down to breaking some fights down. And of course, as always, we start in the main event, the UFC Heavyweight Championship. Tom Aspinall, who was the interim champion, now promoted to the official undisputed UFC Heavyweight Champion, will fight Ciryl Gane for the title, for the championship fight. And it is a mega main event and a massive UFC Heavyweight Championship fight as well. And look, for me, it's a little bit of a tough one of where to actually start with this breakdown, and I feel like we should start with the betting line. Look, Tom Aspinall he's a big favourite, minus 400 in some spots, a little bit shorter in other spots, but again, between minus 350 and minus 400 is the price that you've got to pay if you're wanting to bet on Tom Aspinall. And in all honesty, regardless of which way that you think this fight is going to go and who you think is going to win, even if you think Tom Aspinall is going to win, the value is just on Ciryl Gane from a betting perspective. And I just don't see too many arguments away from that. Like, look, if you're wanting to build like a massive parlay and, you know, for the fun gambler side of things and, you know, you're wanting a parlay piece, then yeah, look, Tom Aspinall is probably the way to go if you're trying to build like 5, 6, 7 plus leg parlays, maybe even less. But like from a long-term perspective and betting value, then Ciryl Gane is that play. Like, he's a big underdog and he's got paths to victory in this fight. In fact, I'll correct myself there. He's got a path to victory in this fight, but that path to victory is a pretty big path to victory, especially for someone that's a 3-1 underdog. So look, it's clear as day. Gane needs to keep this fight standing. If he keeps this fight standing and goes toe-to-toe with Aspinall, he's got every chance of beating Tom Aspinall. But the thing is, even in that type of fight, like, Tom Aspinall has faced some monsters. Like, I know he's not done that well since the Aspinall fight, but look at like the Sergey Pavlovich fight. Like, Pavlovich was going into that fight with Aspinall. It was a dead even pick'em. I can remember saying on the breakdown for that fight that, you know, I just have no idea which way the fight's going to go. I thought it was a coin flip. Like, Pavlovich was knocking everybody out. He had the touch of death, but also had like insane power behind that as well. And Aspinall actually took a couple of those big shots from Pavlovich before finishing Pavlovich himself. So that was the first fight from Aspinall's perspective when I looked at him and thought like, holy shit, Aspinall really is the real deal. And bear in mind, I've bet on Tom Aspinall leading up to these fights. I've also bet against him as well. You know, I cashed the Curtis Blades fight in London where Aspinall had that injury, you know. Hindsight tells me I got pretty fortunate there, but that's the fight game, right? But that Pavlovich fight was the one where I really looked at Aspinall and I thought, well, look, if this guy's not putting Aspinall away, who's going to? But the thing is with Ciryl Gane, although he doesn't pack that initial raw power that Pavlovich packs, Gane's got the technique to be able to find good, accurate shots. So sometimes it's not the big power puncher that finds the knockout, it's the fighter that's got the timing and the accuracy, you know, as Conor McGregor once said. But like from Gane's perspective, if the fight stays on the feet, then I don't think this fight's going to look anything close to him being a 3-1 underdog. But from Tom Aspinall's side, Aspinall's got the opportunity here to be able to take this fight down to the mat. Like Ciryl Gane, and look, you're going to hear a lot of people say, oh, well, look, you know, John Jones laid out the blueprint of how to get Ciryl Gane out there really quickly. And, you know, those people are right, but that's not the fight I'm actually going to focus on when I talk about the ground game of Gane. It's the Francis Ngannou fight. Ngannou came into that fight. Yes, it improved his wrestling. You can clearly tell that. But Ngannou came into that fight compromised. He had a bad injury. I think it was on one of his knees. And he also lost the first 2 rounds of that fight. And then came back and beat Gane. But he beat him by wrestling, by putting Gane on his back. And Gane really didn't have an answer. And, you know, when I'm sort of watching that fight back of what Ngannou did to Gane, and then I picture Tom Aspinall on top, who's got legitimate BJJ to go along with that, you know, with the takedowns, with Gane on his back, I just feel that's a big path to victory for Aspinall. If he can get takedowns in this fight, then I think he can really make that, for me, if Aspinall's getting takedowns consistently here, that is the only way that I feel like Aspinall covers his minus 400 line, because in that type of fight, I think he can do really good work on Gane. But again, there's got to be a lot of things happening before that fight gets down to the mat. And like I say, Gane's tall, he's long, he's big, he's a good technical striker as well. So Aspinall has really got to play this game well to be able to get in on those takedowns and take Gane down. But the thing is, when I ask myself, does Aspinall get this fight down to the mat? If he wants to, we don't know what his game plan's going to be, because he is a really good striker as well. And let's not forget that. But if Aspinall's game plan is to take Gane down, does he get him down? In my opinion, I think he does. And that's the reason why I'm now looking at multiple paths to victory here. Because if this is a 25-minute kickboxing fight, I don't think it's like a foregone conclusion that Ciryl Gane wins the fight. I think Tom Aspinall could win a 25-minute kickboxing fight. It's just, in that type of fight, it's going to be razor close. But then when you start adding in wrestling and grappling in there, like I say, I do understand why Aspinall's the favourite. I think minus 400 is too much of a stretch. I would have probably been looking at, if he's minus 225, minus 250, I think that region would have been fair. So I think it's gone a little bit too wide. But, you know, from a straight pick and prediction perspective, you know, Aspinall's got a couple of paths to victory. He could win a striking fight, and he could win, well, obviously he wins the wrestling and grappling type of fight as well. So for me, that's the side that I'm leaning to win the fight, and I'm picking Tom Aspinall to win this fight and still the UFC heavyweight champion. And in the next fight, in the co-main event, we've got a rematch, but this time it's for the title, the UFC Women's Strawweight Championship fight. We've got Virna Jandiroba versus Mackenzie Dern 2. Now, like I say, these two have fought before. It was a 3-round fight. It went 3 rounds as well, with Mackenzie Dern winning the fight. And it was one of those fights where, you know, pre-fight, myself and I'm sure everybody else breaking fights down was like, we cannot wait for this fight to go down to the mat. Mackenzie Dern, the most decorated women's jiu-jitsu fighter in mixed martial arts. And then you've got Virna Jandiroba, who's not a million miles away from that either. Like, she's got massively good jiu-jitsu credentials, but she's the one with the wrestling upside as well. And then on the feet striking. Both of them, it's been a very similar journey in the mixed martial arts career of, look, we know that we're really good grapplers, but we need to work on the striking to make sure that we're competitive with the best in the world. So that journey that they've both gone on to improve the striking to be able to aid the takedowns, and then of course the jiu-jitsu is very similar. And they've both progressed probably at a similar rate and kind of are at a similar level. Like, it's hard to say that one woman here has got a massive edge in the striking, but when we come down to, splitting hairs, clutching at straws, and looking at which one probably does have the slightly better striking if, we're made to pick a side, I would go Mackenzie Dern. I think Dern's striking, maybe it's not like the cleanest, but it's certainly, in my opinion, slightly more efficient. So, she gets off on some good numbers. She'll come forward. She seems to have a little bit more power behind the punches as well. So from a striking perspective, look, again, if this is a 25-minute kickboxing fight, then it's going to be razor close and close like it was last time. And I just feel Mackenzie Dern might just edge that type of fight out. But like I say, everyone was licking the chops at a grappling fight in their last fight, and there really wasn't too much of it. Both you could clearly tell they both respected each other's ground game. I still think Mackenzie Dern's the better raw grappler, though, from a wrestling perspective, or at least a takedown perspective. I think Jandiroba is slightly better. So again, it's like, for Jandiroba, if she's aware that Mackenzie Dern's grappling is better than hers, does she want to be activating that wrestling edge and getting Dern on the mat? Because the one thing you can say with Dern is when she's on her back, apart from that Haqparast fight years ago, when Dern is put on her back, she's like super active, she's super dangerous, not just with submission attempts, but like with sweeps. You can tell that she's got that raw jiu-jitsu quality in a skill set and a toolbox. And I think that if Jandiroba gets Dern on her back, I trust Dern much more on her back than I do Jandiroba on her back, put it that way. So this is why I'm leaning towards, another win for Mackenzie Dern here, because on the feet, albeit, very close, I think that Mackenzie Dern has the edge there, albeit, again, a slight edge. But then when it comes to the ground game, I just feel that Dern's the more likely fighter to want to engage, to go down to the mat. And if that's the case, there's a greater chance of Dern being on top than being on her back. And again, that aids a Mackenzie Dern win as well. So although I am anticipating another close fight back and forth, if this does go 5 rounds, it's definitely going to be one of them where I feel like both fighters are going to win 2 rounds. But it's who's looking better in the rounds at the winning, and then of course who wins that definitive 5th round out of the 5. So I do think that, coming from a skill set perspective, it should be a fight for Mackenzie Dern. Like I say, slightly better striking, not got the wrestling upside, but I don't think Jandiroba is going to activate that wrestling upside. And then for me, Dern's the better grappler as well. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mackenzie Dern to win this fight and new UFC Women's Strawweight Champion. And in the next fight, again, another super interesting one at bantamweight. We've got Umar Nurmagomedov versus Mario Bautista. Now, Umar Nurmagomedov, of course, he had that failed championship fight against Merab Dvalishvili. I thought that fight was a good fight for Umar Nurmagomedov, even though I've been somebody that's bet on, Merab's pretty much his entire career. I have bet against him a couple of times as well. It's not all been smooth sailing for me betting Merab, but like I say, we just didn't realise how good Merab actually was when he fought Umar, or before he fought Umar, sorry. But Umar, for me, was looking the goods and was absolutely nailed on to be a UFC champion at some point. And I kind of think that he kind of is nailed on to a UFC champion at some point. Like, it's not over for Umar Nurmagomedov. He's still got a long career ahead of him, and a million things can happen. The one thing I'm not sure will happen is if Merab moves up in weight, but at some point, somebody's going to beat Merab, and it's probably, in my opinion, more likely to be an Umar Nurmagomedov who's got the wrestling chops to be able to deal with a Merab. And yeah, Umar can say he was hurt and injured in that fight, but and look, he might have been. We said the exact same thing with Alex Pereira, saying he was injured the first time he fought Magomed Ankalaev, and then he fought him a second time and put him out very, very quickly. So it can sometimes be legitimate, but in this fight against Bautista, the reason why it's super interesting for me, because I don't think Bautista's as skilled as Umar Nurmagomedov as a fighter, and I don't think he's got the ceiling that Umar Nurmagomedov's got. Like, I don't see Mario Bautista being a UFC champion, whereas I could with Umar Nurmagomedov. But the thing is with Bautista is like the boogeyman. Like, he's like a new age Tony Ferguson in a way. Just, he's always going to be there. He's always going to be in your face. He's super well-rounded, and depending on his opponent's style, depends on how he fights, which again, is another real good trait to have. And although like I say, in my opinion, he's not as skilled as Umar, he's just going to be there and he's not going to go away. And like I say, he's in your face. He tries to be overwhelming. He's got low-key good striking, low-key good wrestling, low-key good grappling. He's a fighter that's just not going to make it like a super easy ride for Nurmagomedov. Now, do I think Bautista's going to win this fight? Spoiler alert, no. I think that Umar Nurmagomedov is going to win the fight, but I just, look, Bautista's going to make it a lot tougher than maybe even Umar thinks it's going to be. But I do think eventually Umar's going to get at him. You know, Umar's, again, a low-key good striker himself. We saw in the Sandhagen fight, he kind of wasn't working how we thought it was going to work from a wrestling and grappling perspective. So Umar had to end up bailing on the wrestling and grappling, and struck with Corey Sandhagen. And Umar looked decent. Like, he looked like a good, well put together technical striker that was super efficient and landing good volume. So he can do it all himself. And this is where I think that, you know, that's where he's going to get stuck, because Bautista does like to capitalize on opponents' weaknesses. So, like, you look at the Jose Aldo fight, like, Aldo wasn't going to be as good on his back with Bautista on top than what he would have been striking. So Bautista looked to try and get the fight down to the mat. Then you look at Patchy Mix. You know, Bautista thought that he would be, you know, in Patchy Mix's world on the mat. So stood up, struck with him and beat him, butchered him up striking. So Bautista thrives on picking opponents' weaknesses, and this is where I think he's going to come stuck, because I'm not sure Umar Nurmagomedov has got that absolute weakness in his game. The only weakness we've seen so far is the fact that he can't beat Merab Dvalishvili, which right now it seems like nobody's going to be able to beat Merab Dvalishvili. But Umar Nurmagomedov is a solid striker, he's a solid wrestler, he's a solid grappler. He's got cardio to do it, especially for 3 rounds as well. So even if Bautista wants to push the pace, because again, if Bautista doesn't have edges or strong edges in any area, you know, the ability to break his opponents with pressure and overwhelming volume is always on his card. But with Umar Nurmagomedov, I just don't think he's going to get broke by Bautista and pushed and forced and drowned by Bautista either. So, yeah, I think it's going to be an interesting fight. I think it's going to be a really good fight, but I expect Umar Nurmagomedov to push through in the end. Like I say, the striking, the wrestling, the grappling, it's all at a really elite level with Nurmagomedov. So, for those reasons, I'm picking Umar Nurmagomedov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Aleksandar Volkov versus Jailton Almeida. Now, again, this seems like a pretty straightforward fight from a stylistic clash perspective, at least to break down, because you've got Aleksandar Volkov, who absolutely cannot go to the ground in this fight, otherwise he's going to lose. But Jailton Almeida on the other side, if Almeida can't get this fight to the mat, then he's going to lose. So for me, it's quite simple. If it's a 15-minute kickboxing fight, Volkov wins. It's a very, very high clip. If Volkov can't defend takedowns and Almeida turns it into a wrestling and grappling fight, then Almeida wins this fight at a very, very high clip. So how do we make our decision? And also from a betting line perspective, this type of fight, typically you would be thinking, okay, well, this must be a dead even pick and -110, -115, or maybe there's a super slight favourite on either side. Look, Almeida's closer to a -200 favourite, and I can't disagree with that. So it might sound like I'm contradicting myself here from the intro of this fight, but when you look at which one has got the biggest gap in skill, then for me it's Almeida and his grappling. I think that's the biggest gap in skill. And basically what that means essentially is I think Almeida is a better striker than Volkov is a grappler. So I think Almeida has got a better chance of winning a striking fight than Volkov has got of winning a wrestling and grappling fight. And I don't feel like that's up for debate either. Now, of course, could we see a fight where Volkov does stuff the takedowns? Volkov just works solidly on his wrestling all camp, keeps the fight standing, pieces Almeida. Almeida starts running out of ideas, starts shooting desperation takedowns, can't get them, gets finished. Like, we've seen this film and read this story a million times before in the UFC and in MMA in general. We see it quite a lot where, you know, you do have a dominant sort of specialist within a certain discipline of MMA and they just absolutely cannot get that going to the point where, you know, they get absolutely mullered. But for me, I think that Almeida has got a very, very good chance of looking like a -400, -500 favourite when this fight is over. Because, again, I'm asking myself the question, like I said in the main event with Tom Aspinall and Ciryl Gane, if I ask myself this question, does Jailton Almeida get takedowns in this fight? My answer is yes, I think he does. And maybe they might not be easier early on, but Almeida's got ways of getting fighters down to the mat. Volkov's not getting any younger. He is looking more aged. He is in that situation and sort of that stage in his career where, look, a number of years ago, you'd always get a solid performance out of Volkov. But now there's some inconsistencies in those performances. Sometimes he can look really good, but then he'll have a performance where he looks completely off. And that is quite a common theme when a fighter is running closer to the end of the career than what they are at the beginning of the career. And I kind of feel that's where we're at with Volkov. But then again, with Volkov, you look at what Tom Aspinall did to him. Tom Aspinall, when he took him down, like, Volkov just looked lost. Tom Aspinall absolutely destroyed him on the mat. And I look at Almeida, and Almeida for me is, I'm not saying he's better than Tom Aspinall from a wrestling and grappling perspective. That'll actually be an interesting fight to see how that would play out. But I feel like Almeida's very heavy on top. He's very positionally aware. He mixes between ground and pound and submission attempts. He mixes between laying heavy and floating. And he's just got very good fight IQ once he's on top, to the point where you look at the fighters that are on bottom against Almeida and not many have got up. And I don't think if Volkov gets put on his back, I don't think he stands back up in that round. He either gets finished or the round ends with Volkov on his back. And if it's the latter, I think Almeida comes out again in the next round, takes him down again, and same again. Either finishes Volkov or the round ends, and then at that point Almeida's banked 2 rounds and he's just got to survive the third round, but will likely just rinse and repeat and do it again. I think Almeida's biggest gap in skill is the reason why he's closer to a -200 favourite, and also the reason why I'm picking him to win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jailton Almeida to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is one of the most super intriguing fights for me on the entire card. We've got Aleksandar Rakic versus Azamat Murzakanov. Now, it's super interesting because Murzakanov to this point has looked like an absolute beast in the UFC. He's 15-0. He's, I think, won 5 wins under the. He got 5 wins under the UFC banner, 4 knockouts. Like, he's looking the real deal. The question mark, the big question mark that I've got with Murzakanov though, and this is one where I'm just struggling to get over this question mark, is how good is he actually when you're looking at level of competition? Because he could be an absolute monster, and we'll find out. Look, if he comes into this fight and just deads Rakic here, which is a definite possibility, then yeah, he's the goods in my opinion, because now he's proved it against one of the best fighters in the division, a fighter that's fought the best fighters in the division, that's been around the top 10 for a number of years now, and is a genuinely, legitimately quality fighter. If Murzakanov comes out and deads Rakic or beats him decisively in a decision, then yeah, Murzakanov's the absolute goods. But the thing is, he hasn't beaten anyone even close to the level of Rakic or the fighters that Rakic has been fighting either. So this is the question mark. It's a big step up for Murzakanov, but it's a step up that is completely deserved, and it had to be this step up. It couldn't have been another fight for Murzakanov, because he's absolutely ripping guys and taking them out, everybody outside of that top 10. So it's got to be this level of step up for Murzakanov. But unfortunately, it's going to be very difficult to be 100% certain of where Murzakanov actually is as a fighter at this level in the UFC until we've actually seen him at the level of this level in the UFC. So what I'm basically saying is, we're not going to know if Murzakanov's at this level until after we've seen this fight. Now, he's going to have this fight, and let's say, he deads Rakic, and then he fights a Jiří Procházka or a Jamal Hill afterwards. Well, now we've got something good to reference from Murzakanov's perspective of fighting at that level in the UFC. Just like if he'd fought like a Jamal Hill or a Jiří Procházka before this Rakic fight, we've got now something to judge, but we don't have anything to go off at the minute. So the one area that we can in my opinion, trust is Rakic. And look, Rakic is on a 3-fight losing streak, but you've got to take into consideration the fighters that he's losing against. His last fight lost a decision against Ankalaev. Ankalaev is now the former UFC champion, but, you know, at one point was the best fighter in the entire division. The fight before that, he got beat by Jiří Procházka. Well, look at Jiří Procházka. He's one of the best fighters in the division. Massive, powerful. The fight before that, the Jan Blachowicz fight. Jan Blachowicz, again, is one of the best fighters in the division. Yes, he's not up there anymore like he was a few years ago, but also look at that fight. Rakic was starting to really take over and do well before he blew his knee out mid-fight, injury, and he couldn't continue. So, you know, technically it is a loss, but it wasn't a fight where he got beat. Like it was an injury-related loss. So, you know, he's technically on a 3-fight losing streak, but in actually losing fights, it's a 2-fight losing streak. And those two guys that he lost to are the, you know, within the best sort of 3 or 4 fighters in the entire division. Whereas Murzakanov, like I say, we don't know if he's that yet. He might be, but the thing is with Rakic doesn't have, like, in my opinion, any major weaknesses. Like, there's one big critique of Rakic, which actually is relevant to this fight, but I'll talk about that in a minute. But Rakic is a solid striker. He's big, he's tall, he's long, he's powerful himself, deadly low kicks. How he didn't take Procházka's legs out, I've got absolutely no idea. Like, Procházka must just have legs of steel. But then Rakic has got this really underrated wrestling game, which I've known about for years, even before the Justin Ledet fight when people didn't know, I knew. And then Rakic has got a good grappling game as well. He's got a good cardio. He's, again, got power. He can mix between southpaw and orthodox. He's got a ton of skills. The critique that I have with Rakic is he gets hit a little bit too much. Now, if you look at his actual statistics and look at the numbers, his ratio is really good. It's like he lands double the amount that he absorbs. But what I mean by he gets hit more than what you'd like him to is you can see sometimes the hands drop and the chin's exposed a little bit, which against Murzakanov, look, if he does that and Murzakanov times something and catches him, then yeah, it's going to be lights out, I think, because Murzakanov hits that hard. But when I'm actually looking at fighter versus fighter, skill set versus skill set, experience versus experience, it's hard to not pick Rakic in this fight because there are question marks on Murzakanov. Because look, you could come at me and say, well, Murzakanov is an absolute monster. He is the real deal. You know, he is the business, and you'll find this out on Saturday night. Well, okay, we might do. But what if he's not? What if he's been beating the fighters that he's put in front of him because he's on a different level to them, but not quite at the level above? You know, look at like a Max Holloway when he couldn't beat Alexander Volkanovski as a, you know, a quick example off the top of my head. Like, Holloway was stuck in like a level of his own. There was nobody else at Holloway's level, but Holloway wasn't at Volkanovski's level. You know, what if Murzakanov at that type of, you know, in between levels? Like, you can argue that Murzakanov is the real deal and is going to come out here and going to prove it, but he also might not. And the thing is, even if he does come out here and he does look like he can hang at this level, like, Rakic is still more well-rounded. He's still got an experience edge. He's still got multiple paths to win this fight, whether it's striking or via the wrestling and grappling. So I just find it hard not to pick Rakic here. And then when you look at the odds, it's a pick 'em in most places. Some have got Murzakanov the slight favourite. Again, I kind of understand that. Like, I'm not going to argue against it. But for me, I'm siding with the fighter that I know is at this level. I'm picking Aleksandar Rakic to win this fight. And in the next fight, this fight was actually only added a couple of days ago. I'm not sure whether it was booked for a different card and they've moved it, but seems pretty random that, you know, just over a week out, they've just added this fight here. We've got Nasrat Haqparast versus Quillan Salkilld. Now, I actually like this fight for a couple of reasons. The first major reason I like it is, look, I think Quillan Salkilld, I've said this since his UFC debut, I think this kid is the absolute real deal. I think he's he's already relatively hyped at the minute anyway. You know, he's not a fighter that I'm saying, look, nobody knows about this kid. Like, he is hyped. You can tell by the betting market. He always comes in as a big favourite. However, for this fight, always becomes first time he's not coming in as a big favourite, because he's actually a plus 105. As I'm recording this betting podcast, a plus 105 underdog, which is super interesting. Like, the betting market, the opening lines, bear in mind this is only at $1 or $2. I've got a funny feeling once all books release this line and everybody starts betting and the limits are lifted and people can start betting the money that they want to put on and not being restricted by limits, I think once that happens, we'll see some line movement, and I'd be very surprised if Salkilld goes into this fight, even at a pick'em. I think the line will widen, and I think Salkilld will end up being a favourite in this fight. Like, look, the thing is with Nasrat Haqparast, and what is actually keeping this line from going, or what will keep this line from going crazy, is Haqparast is on a 5-fight winning streak. Slowly, under the radar, he's been putting win after win after win after win together, to the point where he's on a really healthy win streak now. I said it last week with Ayman Zahabi being on a 6-fight win streak, but being on a 4, 5, 6+ fight win streak in the UFC is serious stuff. Like, that is a fighter on real form. Now, there is a couple of split decisions filtered into there, and those split decisions some people will dispute. Maybe they could have gone the other way, but you know, he's on a 5-fight win streak nonetheless. But this killing Salkilld kid, like, I'd like him, man. I feel like Haqparast is still going to be dangerous in this fight. He still packs power. He's well-rounded. He's obviously got the huge experience edge over Salkilld, but Salkilld is one of these fighters where I just feel like he's not fearing anybody. He's a fighter that is totally confident in his ability, but not overconfident, where he'd come into a fight and do something crazy thinking he can pull it off and then, you know, get knocked out or anything like that. He's confident in himself, and as confident as you can be without taking it too far. He's super well-rounded as well, but he's got this like youthful energy and this explosive nature about him, and he's so relaxed inside the cage. I've just got a funny feeling Salkilld is going to know what type of fight is in here, because stopping Haqparast on a 5-fight win streak and getting a name like Haqparast on his win record is a real big thing, especially for where Salkild's at in his UFC career. This is only his 3rd fight in the UFC. So to beat a Nasrat Haqparast who's on a 5-fight winning streak will be a massive, massive victory for Salkilld. So I've got a funny feeling Salkilld might just tone it back a little bit. Again, not overcommit, not do anything that he shouldn't do, but just stick to, you know, his basics, his fundamentals, put some nice work together, explode when he needs to, but just keep that down to a minimum, and basically not give Haqparast too much for Haqparast to grip onto, you know, for a lack of a better phrase, and start to, you know, expose Salkilld in any sort of way. Look, I think it's going to be a close fight. The lines are close for a reason, at least, you know, as I'm recording this podcast, but I just can't pick against Salkilld at this point until Salkilld shows me that he's absolutely not what I thought he is. Look, sometimes you can see through raw skills, and that's kind of what I'm getting with Salkilld. Like, you can see that he's a good striker. He can cope wrestling and grappling. I don't think Haqparast is going to wrestle and grapple, or if he does, I don't think the fight's going to be won and lost because of that. I think the better work in this fight, regardless of who wins, is going to be on the feet. And on the feet, I just like the explosivity of Salkilld, the speed, the movement, the youthful energy, the calm, relaxed fighter inside the cage, someone that's quietly confident in exactly how good they are. I love everything about this Salkilld kid, and I do think that he's going to get the job done against Haqparast and really make a statement on the night. So for those reasons, I'm picking Quillan Salkilld to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Ikram Aliskerov versus Junyoung Park, the Iron Turtle. So this fight, I feel like, is a tough fight for Park, not just from a location perspective, but stylistically as well. For me, the way Park wins this fight is keep the fight standing, keep at range, keep popping that jab out, and just stick to your absolute bare basic fundamentals. Jab, jab, jab cross, low kick, out of range, back to your jab, double jab, and just keep the fight like super actionless, super unentertaining, shall we say, but just keep everything fundamentally sound from a basics perspective. If there's anything outside of that, I think that Junyoung Park gets beat. And even in that type of fight, you might still get beat. Like, go in, punch for punch, hard punch for punch with Aliskerov, I think is going to lead you to getting knocked out for Park. I think if Park gets super close and doesn't keep his distance, Aliskerov will take him down. Might not be easy for Aliskerov, actually. Jungyeon Park, I think, has got some good underrated wrestling, both offensively and defensively. And with his grappling, he's got decent grappling as well. It's definitely an area of his game that he's improved since he came into the UFC. What seemingly looked like purely as a striker, but Aliskerov for me is just better everywhere. I think he's going to be the better striker, wrestler, grappler, from that wrestling and grappling perspective, I think is the biggest gap in skill and the biggest path to victory in the fight. But like I say, if this turns out to be a striking fight, I think Aliskerov's got the explosivity to make it really uncomfortable for Jungyeon Park, who is going to need that sort of calm, relaxed fight where he's operating the ranges he wants to operate in, he's dictating the pace of the fight, but I just don't think he's going to get that dictation of the pace or the range of the fight either. I think it's going to be Aliskerov, and I just feel like it's just not a good fight for Park at all. So for those reasons, I'm picking Ikram Aliskerov to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Mateusz Rebecki versus Ludovit Klein. And again, this is one of those fights where you could just analyse it for days and days and days, and you'll still end up going backwards and forwards about which one you think is going to win the fight. Like, it's a tough one. Again, if this fight stays striking, if this fight's won and lost on the feet striking, you can't. I don't think you can look too far past Ludovit Klein being the winner. If this fight's within the wrestling and grappling, then I don't think you can look past Rebecki winning here either. So it kind of is a stylistic clash where the striker is Klein and the wrestler grappler is Rebecki, but Rebecki can also strike and he's also super dangerous on the feet. We've seen the brutal low kicks he can land as well. But then Ludovit Klein can also wrestle and grapple as well. And I know he kind of didn't show that too much in his last fight, but Mateusz Gamrot is a legitimate fighter and a fighter that, had a massive path to victory over Klein and activated it. Rebecki's got that same advantage, but just not at the level of Gamrot. So that's why this fight makes it closer. Gamrot did, made it look super comfortable against Klein, whereas Rebecki could win. And if he does win via wrestling and grappling, he might win. But again, I don't think it's going to look anywhere close to comfortable. It's still going to be a back and forth competitive fight. So that's kind of where we're at with both fighters. Klein got exposed last time out, but I don't think you can hold that too much against him for this specific fight because Rebecki's not a Gamrot. And then on the flip side, Ludovit Klein could potentially stuff takedowns and like I say, just put a beating on Rebecki on the feet. He could land one of his head kicks. The jab cross high kick is a combination that he throws and lands very frequently. It's a tough fight. I think that Rebecki gets into too many wars. I think if he dials it down a little bit, which I think he might do for this fight, and just try and stay out of a war and look to actually go with a solid game plan, I think he's going to have a good chance of beating Klein. But if he starts getting in striking wars, he's just going to end up being knocked out because Klein's the better striker. I've got to pick one side here, and for me it's a 50-50 fight, and Rebecki's not a pick'em, or this fight's not a dead even pick'em on either side. Rebecki's the underdog, so that's kind of where I'm leaning. When I get into this position and I genuinely struggle to pick one fighter or the other, I just tend to go with whichever one's the underdog because that's probably the right side to go. If I've analysed a fight and I'm really not that confident of who wins, well, the underdog is the side to pick. Even if, I'm not saying I'm betting this fight, but what I'm saying is just from a straight pick and prediction perspective, it's a betting podcast. And I'd be doing a disservice if in a 50-50 fight, I pick the favourite to win. So for those reasons, I'm picking Mateusz Rebecki to win this fight. And in the next fight, this is a super interesting one as well. We've got Abdul-Kerim Al-Selwady versus Matheus Camilo. Now, Al-Selwady is a fighter that I like a lot. I really like his style. I really like the way he pressures. I really like how well-rounded he is. With that being said, I did bet against him against Loic Radzhabov, but again, it was a 50-50 fight in my opinion where Radzhabov was undeservedly an underdog. So I took the underdog money, and Radzhabov had some early scares in the fight where I thought Al-Selwady was going to win, but he ended up coming back and winning. Again, it was a 50-50 fight. Al-Selwady had the first half of the fight, Radzhabov had the second half of the fight. Radzhabov managed to find the finish in his portion. So, that's kind of where we're at, but that doesn't mean that I don't like Al-Selwady. I really like Al-Selwady. Now, the one thing I will say of Camilo is I wasn't overly sold on him pre-UFC, especially in that looking for a fight that he had in the Korean Zombies promotion in Korea. But when he came in against Gabe Green, he showed a very different side to his game to what we've not seen before. Like, he looked like a dead set striker that was very calculated, didn't put out too much volume. But against Gabe Green, man, like, he was hitting some beautiful takedowns, looking good from a grappling perspective, until he got reversed and finished. And look, that can happen on your UFC debut against somebody like Gabe Green, who's got a ton of UFC experience. So you're only going to get better after a fight like that. You're going to be absolutely wounded and gutted, and when you watch that fight back, you'll be devastated. But that's only going to make you a better fighter in your next fight, which is going to be very interesting here. If we'd not seen the grappling chops, shall we say, of Camilo, I'd have been absolutely like 100% in on Al-Selwady in this fight, because Al-Selwady is a very good wrestler grappler. Anyone that's mixing it, sweeping, and taking someone like Lovit Rajabov down 3 times or 4 times, then that fighter's a good wrestler, grappler. So with Camilo, if I'd not seen the Gabe Green fight, I'd have been 100% solely in on Al-Selwady here. It's just, we have seen that different aspect of Camilo's game, so we now know he can wrestle and grapple as well, which makes this fight now a bit closer. But I kind of still like Al-Selwady. From a striking perspective, I think that he's shown he can strike with good fighters, like the George Hardwick fight on the Contender Series. People shit on Hardwick, but George Hardwick is the better Hardwick brother, and for me is UFC quality. So Al-Selwady put an absolute clinic on against him. He didn't overly wrestle or grapple in that fight either. So he can fight against good strikers. So I think he's going to be competitive against Camilo striking. But then when it comes to the wrestling and grappling, I think it's going to be Al-Selwady that's going to be the one engaging in the wrestling and grappling. I think Camilo's going to be the one that tones down those takedown attempts for this fight and tries to keep the fight standing. But because of that, I think Al-Selwady will do okay on the feet. And then when he's mixing in the takedowns as well and looking to grapple with Camilo, I think Al-Selwady is just going to show that he's got the better skill set and is the slightly better fighter here. So for those reasons, I'm picking Abdul-Kerim Al-Selwady to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Walter Walker versus Lewis Sutherland. Now, we're absolutely devastated for both Walter Walker and Lewis Sutherland. They both lost an opponent very late on in recent weeks, and it's no surprise at all that the UFC have just said, well, look, Walter, you lost an opponent, so did Lewis Sutherland, will you fight Louis? And Walter said yes, and then done the same thing to Lewis Sutherland. You've lost your opponent, but there's Walker here that's also lost an opponent, and I think as fighters are fighters, both fighters have said, yep, let's roll. So that's how it's sort of came about. I feel gutted for Louis though, I'll be honest. Like I said when I broke down the Lewis Sutherland and the Taffa fight, that although that was a very 50-50 fight, and Sutherland I don't think had dealt with anybody with Taffa's power, and that's my concern. Sutherland had a very winnable style against somebody like Taffa. But here against Walker, I think it's a much more difficult fight. And the betting line suggests that as well. And like I said in the last podcast, I know Louis, he's trained at my gym that I co-own with Mark Diakese in the UK. He's trained there a number of times. I really, really like Louis. He's such a good guy. And I'm just devastated that he's ended up going from Taffa, which I think was a winnable fight for him, to a Walter Walker, which I think is a horrific fight for him. Like, you look at where Lewis Sutherland really gets at his opponents. He gets in close, he gets in the face, he clinches with them, he ties them up, he pushes them and forces them back to the cage. He uses his physicality, his strength, as his big clinch traits. But against Walter Walker, I just don't see that working as much. Like, Walker's tall, he's massive. I think even from a striking perspective, and look, we're going to get to the heel hooks very shortly, but from the striking perspective, I think even when Louis trying to close the distance, I think Walker's just going to be able to land either long sniper strikes, like your big jabs, your big crosses down the middle, or he's going to come straight over the top with an elbow or straight up the middle with a knee. I just feel that the weapons from a striking perspective on the outside is going to cause Sutherland so many problems that he's going to struggle to actually get into that close range. But even if he does end up clinching with Walker, I think with Walker being the taller, longer fighter, I think that's going to pose some issues for Sutherland as well. I think Walker will dig underhooks well. I think he could get a trip takedown. And then this is the thing, right? These heel hooks, he's got 3 in a row. And honestly, I can definitely see a 4th in a row here. Like, when I say definitely, I don't mean it's definitely going to happen, but I could definitely see this that situation happening. Like there's 3 heel hooks, and Walker seems to have cracked this specialist in the heel hooks. So like it's a bit like, I don't know whether, well, those that are hardcore fans will remember Amir Khani, right? The fighter from Finland. Now, Amir Khani was really dangerous with front chokes, the Darce, the Anacondas, guillotines, modified guillotines. And he said that he had at least like 7 or 8 different ways to set up a Darce choke, right? And he's trained these different ways. And I guarantee most fighters that he fights against don't know of any of these different setups. And I think Volta Walker's going to end up being in this category, but with heel hooks, where he's just got so many different ways to set heel hooks. Even if he's on his back and he's trying to, sort of grab the heel and drag an upright fighter down to the mat, it causes panic in opponents as well, especially when you've got 3 heel hooks. So when you do start to attack the heel and attack the leg, I think fighters are genuinely going to panic. But I just don't think that Louis Sutherland's going to have been around anybody that's got this very strange specialist heel hook skill set. I think that once Walker starts attacking the heel, I think Sutherland's going to panic. I think it might cause him to topple over, and then Volta Walker's going to get that heel hook. I genuinely see that as a very possible and probable outcome. I could also see Walker actually just catching Louis Sutherland on the feet as Louis is trying to close the distance because he can't stay on the outside. I just could see I can see multiple paths to victory in different ways for Walker to win this fight, and I think it's a tough fight for Louis Sutherland. So as much as it pains me to do this and to break this fight down and to pick against Louis Sutherland, I am picking Volta Walker to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Jose Delgado versus Nathaniel Wood. Now, man, this is a fight that's flying under the radar. This could potentially be the best fight on the entire card from an explosive perspective, an entertainment perspective, knockdowns, multiple knockdowns, potentially a knockout as well, wrestling, grappling, scrambles. I think this fight is going to have absolutely everything. Delgado's one of these young hyped fighters that's not fought too many times in the UFC, but he's just looking better and better each time out. Every time he fights, he's stepping up in competition, and he's proving time and time again he's just got this wicked power and explosivity to his game, whether it's a lead left hook, whether it's a big right hand, whether it's a flying knee. The dude is just unbelievably talented, and I think with his age he's going to be a fighter that is just going to dominate in years to come. And I do think that he's going to be a fighter at the very top of the division at some point as well. The thing is for Delgado, like I've just said, he's making the right step-ups in competition every single fight. But damn, this is a step up against Nathaniel Wood. Like, Nathaniel Wood's not only a UFC vet, but he's also been in and around, the top 15. He's fought some of the best fighters in the division. He's beaten some of the best fighters in the division. But Wood's also not a fighter that's like declining or over the hill and towards the end of his career. I think Woods is smack bang in his prime right now. Delgado, I don't think is in his prime, but he's not too far off. But he's one of these up and coming fighters, like developing rapidly from fight to fight. So what Wood's going to face in the cage on Saturday night with Delgado is not what Delgado looked like in his last fight. He's going to be further improved, further developed, more explosive, more powerful. And this is what's going to make for an absolutely entertaining fight, because you've got Nathaniel Wood, who I do think is more well-rounded, because I think his wrestling and grappling is an edge in this fight. But he's also more experienced as well, like I've already mentioned. But Delgado, man, he's so powerful and explosive with the strikes. Nathaniel Wood's been dropped in multiple fights before. He can be got at from that perspective. He can be hurt. And look, if Delgado's gonna land on that chin, numerous times in this fight, I do think Wood is eventually gonna get, so badly hurt that the fight ends up being over, quite quickly after one of the knockdowns or one of the strikes that wobbles him. But if I didn't watch, and again, I know I say this every podcast episode, but if I didn't watch this fight and then I look back in the morning and Nathaniel Wood wins this fight, especially as an underdog, I'm like, okay, well, I get it. Like, it's happened a lot of times before. It's one of these types of fights where the young, developing, improving prospect just ends up biting just a little bit off more than they can chew for one specific fight against an experienced vet. And this fight fits the bill. But I just think Delgado's going to find the home for a punch on Nathaniel Wood. Wood, like I say, has been hurt a couple of times. He's one of these fighters that can look really, really good, look like he's in control, but then in just a split moment just get hit and then things change a little bit. So I think if that's how he fights with Delgado, and if Delgado can find those gaps and holes that other fighters have, I think Delgado actually puts Wood out where other opponents have failed to do it. So for those reasons, I'm picking Jose Delgado to win this fight. And in the next fight, we've got Chris Barnett versus Hamdi Abdelwahab. Now, Chris Barnett, Huggy Bear, man, he's one of my favourite fighters. I don't know how you can not watch a Chris Barnett fight, A, and not like him, and B, just not have a massive smile on your face. Huggy Bear just leaves everything out in the cage. He's a fighter that looks very unassuming, shall we say. You wouldn't walk past him in the street and think he's a UFC fighter. Like, that's crazy. But he's in the UFC for a reason, and sure, he's not as skilled as some of the fighters closer to the top 15, but he's a fighter that, like I say, is super entertaining, fights with a smile on his face, does some crazy shit from like a spinning perspective, high kicks as well for his size and body type. The dude's just like a ball of energy, a bag of fun to watch. Even when he wins, he's got 2 pints, one in either hand, and smashing it down his throat and over his face and everything. So look, I love everything that is Chris Huggy Bear Barnett. But I think Abdelwahab is a tough fight for him. Abdelwahab's this type of fighter that, Chris Barnett, I think, is going to be the more active fighter in regards to speed and movement and how much energy is outputting in the cage. Not volume, energy. But I think Abdelwahab can just sit behind a nice jab, a nice 1-2. Barnett might be trying to throw some flashy stuff, but Abdelwahab just lands the clean strikes, the simple, basic clean strikes. But then when you look at the wrestling and grappling, like Abdelwahab's got a wrestling background, I think that's going to play a factor in this fight as well. If Barnett overextends on, a crazy flashy strike, or if he spins and Abdelwahab times it, I just think Abdelwahab could have a very solid path to victory here, where he just pushes Barnett's back against the cage, get him down momentarily against the cage, land ground and pound. Barnett starts to make his way back up, but then gets taken down again. And I just think it's going to be an ugly fight. If Barnett wins, it ain't going to be ugly. But I do think Abdelwahab's going to win, and I could see it just being an ugly, dirty, gritty, grindy type of fight where he's putting out basics from a striking perspective on the feet, and then entering into the takedowns and just getting the takedowns that he needs against Barnett as well. So again, as much as it pains me to say it, because I would love for nothing more than Huggy Bear to win this fight, but I'm picking Hamdi Abdelwahab to win the fight. And in the next fight, we've got Azat Maksum versus Mitch Raposo. Now, again, I'm going to start with the betting line, because we've got Azat Maksum at a minus 350 favourite with Mitch Raposo around plus 270, plus 280, depending on what book you're at. But look, I just think that betting line's insane. Maksum did come into his UFC debut massively hyped, and look, when I was watching him regionally, I think I actually said in multiple podcasts, like, this guy's probably got the fastest twitch, open space, double leg takedown that I've seen in MMA. Like, he shoots it so fast. He had his UFC debut against Tyson Nam. He won by split decision. Didn't shine in the way that we thought he was going to shine. He was also a massive favourite. Didn't cover his betting line. And again, Tyson Nam, like, is a fighter that is quite stoic, but a fighter that, good fighters should be getting past without having to go to a split decision. And then he loses against Charles Johnson, and then he loses against Tagir Ulanbekov. Now, the Charles Johnson fight, you can't really blame him too much. Like, Johnson, again, is a stoic dude, well-rounded, big for the division, has caused multiple upsets in his career, and continuously and routinely does that. So you can't be overly shocked at that. And Tagir Ulanbekov's a good fighter himself, like a fighter that I rate really highly. So again, Azat Maksum fell short there as well. But again, he's just been a little underwhelming. Even the fights that he's losing, he's not showing that he's like absolutely legit, and just falling short against a much better fighter. It's flat performances. And then with Mitch Raposo on the flip side, look, he's a fighter that's not got off to his UFC start that he wanted. He's also on a 2-fight losing streak. But again, those fights are split decisions. Sumerdege, Andre Lima. Andre Lima is one of the best fighters in the division. I think he's going to be sort of like top 3 challenging for a title in the next like 24 months. And then Sumerdege is a fighter that, again, I rate highly, that's been around the top of the division for ages. So going to a split decision with those guys, again, that's sort of a positive on Mitch Raposo. So you can look at both fighters in very different lights, because you could also say, well, look, Mitch Raposo shouldn't have been going to those splits. They should have been unanimous. He was dominated. And then on Maxum's side, you could say, again, the negative sides of, well, he's been flat, the flat performances, he's not been performing. But on the other side, Mitch Raposo's only, losing against really good guys, and so is Azat Maxum. But regardless, like the betting line at minus 350, it's like, the only thing is here, and this is the reason I'm not going to pick the underdog in Raposo. I am going to pick Maxum to win the fight, because if any of these fighters looks like a minus 350 favourite after the fight, it is more likely to be Maxum. I don't think he will, but I do think that, I don't see any scenario where Raposo comes out of this fight and you think, well, he should have been a minus 300, minus 400 favourite. But with Maxum, I do feel that that's a possibility. The wrestling's good. I know Raposo's wrestling's good as well. But as at Maxum, I just feel is a little bit more explosive into the entries. I think he's a bit faster, a bit more athletic. I think from a striking perspective, he's just going to be a little bit quicker, not only within the strikes, but within the movement, and therefore that should add volume as well. Whereas on the other hand, with Raposo, how does Raposo win this fight? Well, drowns Maxum, puts Maxum on his back foot. I think Raposo's probably going to be a little bit more physical, a little bit stronger. So maybe he backs Maxum up, gets him tied up in a clinch, uses the strength and physicality against the cage, and maybe looks for his own takedowns. Maybe he keeps the distance from Maxum, enters into boxing range, puts some nice combinations together. It's it's all possibility. It's all a possibility, and it's all somewhat probable. But I just think Maxum's got more ways to win this fight. I think if it is going to be a wrestling and grappling fight, I trust Maxum a little bit more. And even from a striking perspective, in and out of range, mixing in the takedowns, but, just to block flow of the opponent, and then the fight goes back to the feet, put some good strikes together before shooting again. Suddenly, Mitch Raposo doesn't know when the takedowns are going to be coming, and then that allows Maxum to thrive more from a striking perspective. I think that side of the fight is more likely. So for those reasons, I'm picking Azat Maxum to win this fight. And in the next fight, the last fight to break down, we've got Jacqueline Amarim versus Mizuki Inoue. Now, Amarim is a massive favourite in this fight, minus 450, minus 500 in some spots. I think it's only going to climb, and I kind of agree with it. Do I see much value in it? From a straight bet and from a long-term perspective, no. Do I think it's a good parlay piece? Yes, because I think it'll be a winning parlay side of your ticket. But look, I'm a massive fan of Amarim, and I know that she's had her critics, and I know that the critique is, the tiredness sometimes and starting fights well and then fading a little bit. But that sort of stuff is only going to improve over time anyway, especially, she's around some of the best girls in the world at American Top Team. And I think that's only going to allow her to grow from strength to strength in not just that cardio and pacing perspective, but the striking is going to get better. That's going to aid the wrestling and grappling, where Amarim is very, very, very strong, not only from a skill set perspective, but physically strong on top. Then when you get Mizuki Inoue, she's a fighter that's very light on her feet, very quick, but needs to keep the fight on the feet striking, unless she's got the wrestling and grappling advantage. But in this fight, she absolutely doesn't. So she's definitely going to need to keep the fight on the feet. But the thing is, I feel like she's going to be running a lot in this fight, because once Amarim gets a hold of her, I think there's going to be a massive physical and strength and power edge to Amarim. So when she gets a hold of Inoue, I think she's going to be able to ragdoll her down to the mat without too much effort. I think Inoue is going to be at a massive disadvantage from a physicality perspective. But then the wrestling and grappling, like I say, the physicality is going to aid the wrestling anyway, or the takedown game, shall we say. But then once Amarim's on top, I think she's just going to be a real problem for Inoue. I think it's what I like to call a stylistic nightmare for Mizuki Inoue in this fight. I don't think she's going to have much success getting back up to her feet because, again, I think she's going to be at a strength and physicality disadvantage. And then Amarim's like a very high-level grappler. So once she's on top of Inoue, which that isn't Inoue's strengths within mixed martial arts, I think Inoue is just going to end up getting drowned in this fight. I think Amarim's got a real good fight here to look really good. Now, Inoue's path to victory, keep the fight standing, which I've already discussed, I think is going to be, a massive mountain to climb in itself. But Amarim can still strike as well. She's still bigger and more powerful, so the strikes are going to have impact. And once Inoue feels the impact, I do think she'll back off a little bit, overly respect the power coming back at Amarim. Or you could maybe argue rightfully respect the power from Amarim. But either way, I think it's going to be Inoue that's going to be on the back foot more often than not here. That's going to allow the takedowns or the trips or the reaps for Amarim to get the fight down to the mat. And I just think Amarim's going to have a real good time on top of Inoue, massively above her from that grappling perspective. I think it's going to be levels above. I think we're going to see it on the night. For those reasons, I'm picking Jacqueline Amarim to win this fight. And that's all for this episode of the podcast. As always, thank you for everybody tuning in. If you're on one of the podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple Podcast, Amazon Music, please come over to YouTube as well. It really helps the YouTube algorithms for our channel. It doesn't cost you anything to subscribe. It doesn't cost you anything to like. It doesn't cost you anything to comment on the video on YouTube either, but all really, really help us from growing our YouTube channel's perspective. And of course, it is myself that does reply to the comments as well. So tell me who your favourite underdog is. Tell me who you think is going to drop the ball as the biggest favourite on the card, or which biggest favourite is going to lose the fight. Tell me what your favourite parlay is, what your favourite bet is on the entire card, whatever that is. If we disagree, tell me why you disagree. Everything just super helps the channel. I'm always willing to have a conversation with absolutely anybody that's talking sense. So yeah, come over to YouTube, like, subscribe, comment. And for one last time, if you're wanting to jump into the action, then make sure you do so at MMAplay365.com. Something for every type of gambler. We've got AI with Base AI, our UFC prediction software, professional handicapper advice. The prices are super affordable. $5 for one event, $10 a month, or $99 for an entire year of predictions. And that's all at MMAplay365.com. I'm Newsome. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you again next week.